Because as we finish this mini-series, I guess I'm asking the question today, well, what happens when you don't get your miracle? That's what I'm asking today. That's what I'm asking us to look at for a few minutes. What happens when you don't get your miracle? And so we're going to look at a story in the Bible. If you've got your Bibles with you or on your phones, it's in Matthew chapter 11. We'll look at that in a minute, but you can at least get yourselves ready. We're going to be looking at a story in Matthew chapter 11. I don't know about you. Have you ever felt let down? You ever felt let down by somebody or something? You know, when I was 16, and I know there's maybe a couple of 16-year-olds in the room still. You know, when I was 16, I had a girlfriend. And that's a miracle in itself, to be fair, but, you know. But, yeah, my first girlfriend when I was 16, I was like, okay. And some of you who know me well, you know who she is. She doesn't live in Birmingham. She's not part of this church anymore. Don't worry, I'm not speaking to anyone. I'm not telling you what her name is, Kirk. But anyway, my first girlfriend at 16, and met her at a youth camp, and you know, and all that happened. And as you know, I turn a significant 0 at the end of this year as well. So on October the 4th, make sure you bring your checkbooks, and I'll give you my bank details. But on October the 4th, I turn 50. Yes, JJ, 50, not 60, but 50. And but I was 16, and that's a long time ago, isn't it? And I can remember this relationship that had started, and you know, when I was 16, it was back in the either the late 80s or the early 90s. My maths isn't quick enough, but you know, it was before SMS and mobile and Facebook and Insta and TikTok and all that, and it was, you communicated with people who didn't live near you by letter. Do you remember that? Give me a wave if you've ever received or sent a love letter. Jamal, you should be putting your hand high in the air so that Abby can see that we can testify that you've sent love letters to your wife. Anyway, but I had a letter through the post, and it was on my birthday, and I recognized the handwriting. I thought, oh, isn't this lovely? Isn't this lovely of my girlfriend? I'd been a girlfriend just for a few months because we met in the summer. It's now October. And as I opened up this letter and I started to read it, it said, "Dear Simon, it's not you, it's me. Ditched, dumped, done with on my birthday of all things. Have you ever felt let down by someone?" Oh, I have. I'm sure you have too. And today I want to talk about when that someone who you feel let down by might actually be God. And that's the story that I want to look into. We're talking about miracles, you know, in a crowd this size. I know some of you have maybe followed Jesus for a while now. You've prayed for things over the course of your life. Maybe it was something that you desperately needed. Maybe it was a miracle, and you've received it. God's come through for you. God's answered your prayer. You were so pleased and so glad when God came through for you. But I equally know that in a crowd this size, whether you follow Jesus for a few weeks or many years, there's times when you've prayed for things that you still haven't yet seen. What happens when you don't get your miracle, church? Is what I want to look at it. Because some people receive miracles, it seems. Some people get their prayers answered, it seems, and others don't. And when that happens, when you don't get your miracle, what does that conjure up in your mind? Questions of, does God care? I thought God was going to answer my prayer. I thought God was going to come through for me. I thought God was going to show up for me. I thought God was going to do it through me and for me, and I prayed for a miracle and I didn't get what I wanted. And I want to suggest this morning that whether you follow Jesus for a few weeks or for many years, sometimes it seems that God maybe just holds out on you. Let's look at the story of a character in the Bible that you're well known with, well versed with. Even if you're new to church, you've heard of his name. He's in Matthew 11. He is John the Baptist, John the Baptizer. A guy who was quite unkempt in his appearance, who didn't live within the walled cities, but would kind of camp outside in the desert, in the wilderness. And And this is the story of John the Baptist. In Matthew chapter 11, as Matthew, person who followed Jesus around for 3 years, begins to record and recount the stories and the things that he'd seen Jesus do. And here's a story of his cousin, his friend, the person who had kind of set up the platform for Jesus to kind of come in and start working his ministry. Here's John done a great thing. And we read in Matthew 11, in the very first few words, it says this, it's on the screen. Now when John, while imprisoned. John, while in prison, he's in prison. I'll explain why he's in prison in a minute, but let's keep reading on. He's in prison and he hears the works that Jesus is continuing to do. He hears that Jesus has now started his ministry. He's doing things that are incredible, and he says to his friends, his followers, his disciples, he says, can you go to Jesus who's doing these amazing miracles and things, and can you ask him 2 questions, please? Because I'm here in prison. And he says to him, are you the one we are to expect? Or shall we look for someone else? What a question from John, the cousin, the friend, the predecessor of Jesus. Go and ask Jesus, is he the one? Is he the one? Because guess what, boys? I'm in prison. Life isn't good. Is he the one that's going to do something about it? And so he sends his friends to go and ask those 2 questions. And Jesus answers, and you can read with me, it says, Jesus says, go and report to John. In other words, go back to John and tell him these things. Tell him the things that you've heard. Tell him the things that you see. Tell him that the blind receive sight, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised up, and the poor have the gospel preached to them. Go tell John, who's in prison, what you see, what you hear, what you witness, what you've heard about, what's been said about me. Go and tell him the lame walk, the dead will be raised, the blind will see, the deaf will hear. Go and tell him. And then he ends his little retort by saying this, and blessed is he who does not take offense of me. You see, John the Baptist doesn't get his miracle. Cousin of Jesus, the forerunner of the Messiah, the person who stood on the banks of the River Jordan as Jesus walked by, he said, look, the Lamb of God, the one who will take away the sins of the world. Here's John preparing, warming the hearts of that area in Galilee about the Messiah that's going to come, that you will soon see a man come and he will do amazing things. He is the Messiah. He is the Christ. He is the one that's been promised. He is the anointed one, and you will see him do amazing things. Look, the Lamb of God that comes to take away the sins of the world. And here's John in prison. What happens when you don't get your miracle? See, why is John in prison? It's not because he's done anything wrong. He's not done anything wrong to end up in prison, but he's been outspoken about the leader of that region, a man called Herod. You see, John's kind of confronted Herod in public. And in that day and age, and probably still in today's day and age, you don't confront people in public or in leadership. Imagine you, like our current Prime Minister, is taking a lot of flack for maybe a decision that he was or wasn't aware of. But in this day, when you accused or you said something in public about a leader, it wasn't going to just be a little telling off. No, John's in prison. The reason why he's called out Herod is that Herod has taken a visit to his brother in Rome, and when he's arrived in Rome to see his brother, he's looked at his brother's wife and gone, "Ooh, she's quite nice." And Herod was married, and yet Herod thinks, "Oh, you're quite nice, sister-in-law." And so he brings his sister-in-law back with him. And as the story recounts, that Herod kind of gets rid of his wife and takes on his sister-in-law as his new wife, and John calls him out on it. He said, "What are you doing? We don't act like that. We don't behave like that." And because of his outspokenness, his correct outspokenness to Herod, Herod has put John in prison. You know how the story ends, right? What happens when you don't get your miracle? Because while John's in prison, while John's waiting, while John's thinking about, what's going on, Jesus is continuing to do his ministry. Jesus is healing people. Jesus is seeing the lepers cleansed. Jesus is seeing the lame walk. Jesus is seeing the blind see. Jesus is hearing the deaf hear again. Jesus is doing great things, and he's doing great things for everyone except for John. Except for John. John's not getting his miracle. John's in prison. John's in a dark, dingy dungeon in the hills of the cliffs. And when John hears about the Messiah, he sends his friends to Jesus and he says, as we've read, ask him, are you the one? Are you the one that we're expecting? Are you the one, or do we expect for someone else? In other words, Jesus, when are you going to come and do something about my situation? When are you going to come and burst through the prison walls, grab me by the hand, and let's walk out freely together? When's that going to happen? Because if you're not going to do it, who's going to do it? Church, what happens when you don't get your miracle? See, have you ever felt let down? You know, I gave you a funny story when I felt let down as a 16-year-old. But now when I look back, I'm so glad I was let down because I got to marry Stephanie. And 16 years later, we're happily married with 2 children. I'm kind of glad I never married my first girlfriend, if I'm honest, because I've seen pictures of her on Facebook. No, I didn't say that. Janice, you should not be laughing at things like that. It's terrible, honestly. Pastor Kurt dared me to say that. Anyway, let's move on. See, the truth is, my brother knows exactly what I'm talking about. Well, we will move on. All right, okay. But seriously, have you ever felt let down? Maybe you've been let down by a parent. Maybe you've been let down by a sibling. Maybe you've been let down by a friend. Maybe it was a repair at your house that you knew your friend could do and he said he would come over and he never came over. Maybe it was, you were desperate for someone to pick up your kids from school because you couldn't make it and someone said they could do it and then suddenly they didn't do it. I'm sure you've been let down at some time by someone who you knew could help but chose not to. You see, John begins to doubt Jesus here, doesn't he? Are you the one? Or are we to expect another? And I think John is doubting that Jesus is powerful because he's seen Jesus move. He's seen him do the miracles. He's seen him speak with authority. He's seen him help and show kindness and compassion and all that thing. But I think John begins to doubt Jesus because Jesus isn't helping him. He's in prison. And he's probably thinking, well, Jesus, if you are the Messiah that I have proclaimed you to be, the one that I've prepared the way for, the one that I've told everyone about, if you're my friend, you're my cousin, then why am I in this mess? Why have you left me here for so long? Why haven't you come to even see me or send word to me? Why have you not asked about me? Why have you done nothing to improve my conditions at the minute? You see, my first point is that disappointment can lead to doubt. Let's just be real for a few minutes this morning in church. John isn't doubting from a position of unbelief, though. He's just doubting from a position of disappointment. And there's a difference. And many of you and I know that place of disappointment, right? There's times in your life when you're just disappointed. Disappointed with people, disappointed with how life's going, disappointed you didn't get the job, disappointed that your kids maybe are in a place that you're not happy with. You're just disappointed. And sometimes we're disappointed with God. The healing didn't happen. The relationship wasn't restored. The prayer wasn't answered. And disappointment, just like John is living this out, can imprison your perspective. That's what disappointment can do. Because you become wrapped up and you become trapped in what you see and how you feel. And we've all seen things in our lives and we've all felt things in our lives that kind of change our perspective on life, and it can kind of imprison you. And even when you're a follower of Jesus, even when your faith is real, there can still be those moments when you have questions and doubts and those feelings that even the strongest and most mature Christians that we've ever met and may even know will have at times. Sometimes we feel like we're suffering for Christ. And when it goes on for a long time without any relief, it really can test your faith at times, can't it? sometimes very difficult to endure. And like I said, even the most mature believers need all the help they can get at times to strengthen their faith. I think of two characters in the Bible that was in a similar position to John. Abraham, the father of our faith, if you like. When God in his vision to Abraham was telling him, listen, I'm going to give you everything, all this land, all your descendants are going to be as numerous as grains on the seashore. You're going to do great things, I'm going to bless you. And Abraham still says, Lord God, how may I know that I'll possess it? There's a doubt there. Gideon, another kind of example. The Bible calls him a mighty warrior. And yet Gideon, having been tasked by God to take 300 men to defeat an army of thousands, he says to God in Judges chapter 6, verses 36 to 37, Gideon says, if you will deliver Israel through me, as you've spoken, then I'm going to put a fleece of wool on the floor. And if there's dew on the fleece, in other words, if it's wringing wet in the morning, but the ground surrounding it is dry, then I'll know that you've spoken. You see, it's okay to have those moments of questions, church. It's okay that you have maybe those feelings that, God, are you really going to come through? You see, I think as believers of Jesus, there will be moments, there will be traces of disappointment and sometimes temptation that can cause you to question the most basic truths that you've ever felt about God. God, are you turning your back on me? Are you rejecting me forever? I've told you this story before, when I bought a property back in the late 2000s and lived there for a few years. Then when I got married, moved out and kept that place out and rented it out. And I rented it out for a long, long time, and I had lots of different people in. And, as a landlord, it was an interesting time. But my property was the top floor of an apartment block, and this flat roof that was on top was just in bad repair. And every time it rained significantly, or every time it snowed, then through the ceiling there would come drips and leaks and stains and mold and all that. And I'm thinking, oh my word, what is going on? And I'm trying to do everything that I can do. And everyone else is moaning at me. And I'm moaning to the management company and going, can you sort this out? I'm checking all my legal rights. I'm checking solicitors, what they can do. I'm seeing if there's any help for me. And for 3 years, I had this problem going on. And I'm praying about it. I'm going, God, help me to resolve this. Do something. Stop it raining for at least the next 3 years. And you know what? It took 3 years for that stinking roof to be resolved. And it was just a journey that I had to go on, and it was just full of disappointment, and I was losing money, and I was having to give 50% reductions in rent, and I'm paying for people in the end to stay at my own property. You see, disappointment with God is not uncommon. If you're sitting there thinking, am I the only one? You're not. In fact, may I be as bold to say, if you've never felt let down by God, then you may be probably not trying to follow him fully. It's okay to have questions. Like, God, have I done something? You seem to be unfair to me. You seem to be hidden to me. You seem to be silent to me. Why didn't I get my miracle? Because John didn't get his miracle. John didn't get his miracle. You see, my second point is this, is that I've found in my life, in my Christian life, and maybe you have found it as well, that Jesus doesn't always change your circumstance, but he will try and change your perspective. Jesus may never change your circumstance, but he will endeavor through your faith to change your perspective. You see, he sends that message back to John, doesn't he, through his boys. He says, go and tell John the things which you hear and see. The blind see, the lame walk, the lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised up, the poor have the gospel preached to it, and blessed is he who is not offended of me. I think Jesus could be saying here, don't judge me, John, by what I haven't done for you, but remember what I'm doing for everyone, everywhere else. Don't judge me, John, for what I haven't done for you in this moment, that you want me to do right now, but don't forget that I'm working on all people everywhere. See, Jesus wanted to assure both John and the disciples that he was the Messiah. Him saying that statement assures John, you are the Messiah. Look, the miracles, the lepers are cleansed, the blind see, the lame walk. But he's also reminding John that his power would probably mostly displayed in humble acts of service, meeting individual needs, and not necessarily the spectacular displays of political deliverance that the whole community wanted that day. Jesus may seem silent to you at times, but I encourage you, church, to try and not live so self-focused all the time. But listen to the other stories that are in this room. Listen to the stories of the people on your row. Ask them, how has God come through for you in those moments? Because I can guarantee that every person who follows Jesus has got a story that you probably need to hear. And you know what? Every week we ask for praise reports, but not enough come in. You've all got answers to prayers. You've all got times when God's come through for you. You need to tell your story. Because I need to hear it. Because when I'm going through something, when I'm kind of just in that moment, I need to hear that God is still moving and he's working in my friend's life, my church life, my connect group's life. He's working in other people's life. You see, yeah, we've got to listen to other stories from other people of how Jesus has answered their prayer. Listen, church, yours is on the way. Your answer from God is on the way. But I want you to use other people's stories to keep your faith high. Because Jesus' comments to John are meant to change his perspective before he changes his circumstance. And looking back in my life, in circumstances, you know, most of you know I was a school teacher for over 20 years and came out of education just a couple of years ago. And in those 20 years of in schools, you know, starting off as a young whippersnapper at 23 and then finishing when I was a little bit older. You know, many opportunities came my way. Those of you who work in business, those of you who work in schools, in other companies, you know opportunities come, promotions and other roles and responsibilities. Maybe they even include a bit more pay. I don't know, but I went through many, many times of applying for different positions at my school. You know, as a secondary department, and then a head of department, and then what they call an advanced skills teacher, and then associate head, and all those different positions came up, advertised, and you know what? I didn't seem to get any of them. And I was a pretty good teacher. That's what Ofsted told me a couple of times. I mean, I paid him 10 quid, but that's what he told me. But you know what? When I look back, God wasn't granting my miracle. God wasn't granting my wish, my desire, my hope. And he used that disappointment, and let me tell you, those were disappointments in my life. I won't tell you the story of how it took me nearly 3 months to get over one of the disappointments when another woman from an overseas Zoom call got a head of department job over me who had done the job for 4 months previous. That was disappointing. But you know what? God uses your disappointments at times to show you that his plans for you are better than your plans that you could ever have for yourself. Because the roles that I wanted in education might have helped a few students to study better. They may have helped a few teachers to teach better. They might have helped a few leaders to lead better. But God's role for me in the end actually gave me a platform to school a school in his ways, his values, his thoughts, his philosophies, his love. I got the dream job in the end. I wasn't just working with a few members of staff and a few kids. No, I got the opportunity to influence a whole school, 1,200 students and over 100 staff. Guess what? In the ways of God. You see, your disappointments won't last forever. But you've got to remember, as a follower of Jesus, if you believe that God's plans are better than your plans, I promise you over time, you might not get your miracle today. You might not get the thing that you're wishing for today. You might not necessarily get the thing that you think is the best thing for you today. But God has a way of putting you in positions and opportunities that are beyond your wildest dreams. You see, Jesus, really what he's doing here and what he wants to do in your life, he wants to protect you from circumstantial faith. You see, circumstantial faith is just based on things that happen. Well, if this happens, and I think it's good, then maybe that's God. No, I'm not discounting that certain things are good and that is God, but you can't build a faith on circumstances. You see, faith based only on outcomes that you want is not real faith. It's just circumstantial faith. God's power is not proven only by the miracles you receive. It's also proven by the hope that you can still hold on to even when you don't get your miracle. That is what real faith is. That's what Jesus wants to build in your life. And as a church community here, that's what I want all of us to be, building the real faith that Jesus is more interested in changing my perspective than necessarily always my circumstances. Third and final point is this, is that I want to say this though, that just because you might be in a tough challenge, just because you might be in a tough moment, just because you've been in a disappointing time, maybe the diagnosis isn't good, maybe the job didn't come through, maybe the kids are causing chaos. I don't know what it is, but I want to say this to you, that your circumstances do not define God's love for you. Your circumstances do not define God's love for you. If you find yourself on the mountain high celebrating, woohoo, and then the next minute you're down there in the valley, can I just say this to you? Whether you're up there or down there, it does not change God's love for you. It doesn't. Because right after Jesus sends John's disciples away, and he says, listen, go and tell John that I'm healing the sick, I'm cleansing the lepers, I'm making the blind see again. Then when they've gone, Jesus returns to his conversation that he's having with the people around him, and he says these words. He said this in Matthew chapter 11, the next verse, it says, among these born of women, there has never been anyone greater than John. There is a great tribute from Jesus to John who's in prison. He's basically saying, yeah, he's in prison. Yes, he's not liking it. Yes, he's asking me to do something about it. But I want to remind John, and I want to remind everyone else, that your circumstances that you find yourself in do not change God's love towards you. Jesus says about John, there is no one greater in this world than John. John, in this moment, is the greatest, even in prison, even without his miracle. Why? Because God's approval is not based on your circumstances. And if you need to hear that in your heart this morning, then hear it. Because God loves you regardless of your circumstances. And he wants you to trust him in spite of your circumstances. Because that's how God works. He wants to change your perspective maybe before he changes your circumstance. He wants to develop real faith in you, not just circumstantial faith. Let's read Jesus' tribute to John. You know, tributes are often given after people have passed away. But here is Jesus giving a public tribute to John before he passes away. Matthew 11, 7 to 11, it's on the screen. And he's talking to the people in the room now. And he says, as these men were going away, so John's disciples have gone, Jesus began to speak to the crowds about John. Now remember, John the Baptist was this, like I said earlier, this kind of seemingly unkept character, a bit strange, a bit odd. You know someone, they're sitting next to you. But you know, he's kind of dressed in a little strange way. He's maybe a little unshaven, and he maybe says some weird things and eats some strange things. But this is what Jesus says to the crowds who have gone to John many times to visit him, to hear him, to listen to him. He says, what did you go out into the wilderness to see? A reed shaken by the wind? In other words, did you go and see a man that was kind of wavering and weak and kind of, oh, I'm over here 1 minute saying this and then I'll change my mind and go over here and say something different? No. He says, what did you go out to see? A man dressed in soft clothing? No. Because those who wear soft clothing are in king's palaces. John was in the wilderness in a tent. He says, but what did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes. I tell you, a prophet. but more than a prophet. This is the one about whom it was written centuries ago, behold, I send my messenger ahead of you. This was a prophecy that John the Baptist would be before Jesus, that he would pave the way. He would warm the hearts of the community so that the Messiah, the anointed one, is on his way. Did you not hear that I would send a messenger ahead of you who will prepare? Truly I say to you, and then he says it again, among those born of women, there has not been arisen anyone greater than John the Baptist. Jesus doesn't love John any less because of his situation, does he? Publicly endorsing who John is, saying he was an amazing man. There's no one greater, but he's in prison. No, Jesus praises John, even though his personal circumstances are clearly tough. Jesus elevates him in opinion above all the prophets, the previous men and women of God that have gone before him. And Jesus praises John's personal character, doesn't he? He praises his personal character. He reminds people of the time when all the crowds from the communities around Israel and the surrounding regions went out into the wilderness, went out of their way, went out of their day to go and hear a strange man dressed in kind of camel cloth, eating locusts and honey with a real big beard, I imagine. But he's basically saying the kind of movement that John started doesn't happen or start around a weak or insignificant person. So what draws the crowds, what drew them, it was those essential traits that draw anyone to anyone of influence, especially in spiritual matters. The first quality that Jesus kind of accolades John having is strength. Not physical strength, but strength of mind, strength of heart, unwavering conviction. John was not like this reed blowing in the wind, being tossed from here and there by opinion, whether it's public or private. But John was not weak or easily swayed. No, he was like an iron pillar, Jesus was saying. His mark was life by clarity. His mark was life marked by conviction. His life was marked by courage. You see, I think nothing truly worthwhile is accomplished without any steady determination, is it? Like, my wife mocked me for months about going to the gym. She said, Simon, you're in your 40s, you're going to lose muscle mass. I can say that because she's next door. And for ages, she was on to me about going to the gym. And you know what? Last September, I started. And with a bit of steady determination, I keep going, try to go 2 or 3 times a week. I actually feel stronger for it. In fact, I'll challenge any of you to an arm wrestle right now. But you know what? Nothing is accomplished in life, is it, without any steady determination. A firmness of spirit that will keep you grounded. Your convictions that keep you steady. Your commitment to God's calling and God's purposes in your life, no matter what the opposition or circumstances you face might be. Your hardship maybe at the minute does not mean God loves you any less. So I want to encourage you, role model that strength of character, that unwavering conviction, that heart that God is real. God can be trusted to your kids, to your grandchildren, to your partner, your spouse, that even though life throws its questions at times, you can be brave enough to follow God and allow him to change your perspective. Your circumstances, church, do not define God's love for you. I want to invite our worship team back, and we're going to finish our service in a while. But I want to ask you that question, remind you of that question. What happens when your miracle doesn't come? What happens when your miracle doesn't come? John is in a predicament, and Jesus tells him a few things, or tells his friends to go and tell him a few things. And I want to just encourage you this morning that I think you could do 3 simple application points to this story, this moment, that when you don't get your miracle, what can you do? I want to encourage you to look back. I want to encourage you to look back. I want you to look back, and I want you to remember God's past faithfulness to you. I want you to look back at times when God's come through for you. I want you to look back and remind yourself at the times that you've prayed and those prayers have been answered. I want you to look back. Because looking back helps you to understand that you can face things going forward. Because if God did it then, he can do it again. And we sang it this morning, even when it's quiet or when it's seemingly not moving, we can still have a faith that trusts that God can do anything with you and through your life. I want to encourage you to look back at what he's done before. If that means some of you need to start writing down things that God has done in and through your life this afternoon so that you can look back in weeks and months to come, then do it. Because if you've got nothing to look back on, it's trying, it's more testing perhaps, because you can't remember. And those of you who maybe followed Jesus for a few weeks or for a few months and you're thinking, well, I haven't got much to look back on, I want to encourage you that God will give you stories to write in the next weeks and months to come, and write them down. Because when you're going through it, when you don't get your miracle, you've got to look back. Second thing that Jesus encouraged John to do, not only look back, but look out. Look out. Look out and see that God is still working. That's why after church this afternoon, as you're in the foyer, why don't you find out a story from someone, how God has answered a prayer for them? Because that's what Jesus encouraged John to do. He says, look, you can see the lepers are being cleansed, the blind are seeing, the deaf are hearing, that even the dead are being raised, the poor are having the gospel preached to them. You've got to look out and see that God is moving. You might not feel it moving in your circumstance right now, but guess what? He's still moving. He's still moving. Maybe you need to read some stories, some real life testimonies. You know, we've got Trinity, we've got our own kind of magazine on real life testimonies. I think there's a few in the foyer. I know at Connect Groups you've all been given one. You can read some of the real life testimonies from real people where God has answered prayers for them. You've got to not just look back, you've got to look out and see that God is still moving, still working in your friend's life, your family life, your Connect Groups life, this church's life. He's still moving. And lastly, you've got to look up. You've got to look back, you've got to look out, you've got to look up. Why? Because I've got to believe as a follower of Jesus that I can trust God's perspective over my circumstance. That's what living a life of faith is all about. That's what being a follower of Jesus is about. That's what being a Christian is about. It's understanding and trusting that God, your perspective is bigger and grander than my circumstance. I've got to trust God's heart even when I don't see God's hand move immediately. I've got to trust God's heart even when I don't see his hand move immediately in my life, or maybe I don't understand how his hand works in my life. You see, the solution to my circumstance, can I just say this? The solution to my circumstance is probably not found in the circumference that surrounds me. But it will be found when I look up, because the solution is always found above you. The solution to your circumstance might not be in what you can see around you. Because all you might be able to see is dead ends and disappointments and unanswered prayer perhaps and other things that are going on. As you look around, you can't see it. Can I encourage you, church, to look up? Because when you look up and you see God's perspective on it, then your life and your mindset and your thinking can change. You know, Jesus had disappointments, right? And 2 weeks ago, as we celebrated Easter, Jesus didn't get his miracle. He died, right? We're told the Bible describes the scene when Jesus is in the garden, the last few moments before his arrest, and he gets down on his knees and he's disappointed. He's enduring the thought of what's going to happen. And the Bible tells us that he's so full of anxiety and stress that he begins to actually sweat, not just droplets of sweat, but blood. And he says those famous words, God, if there's any other way that you can relieve me of my disappointment, my circumstance. But then he says, God, as he looks up, because he just doesn't look around to his surroundings and his circumstances, but he looks up and he says, God, not my will, but your will be done. I'm looking up and I'm believing and I'm hoping and I'm trusting. And I want to encourage you to do the same. Yes, Jesus went to the cross and it looked like for 2 days that God did nothing. And you might be saying to me, Simon, I've lasted more than 2 days in my disappointment where God's done nothing. But I want to encourage you that God is doing everything in the middle of your unanswered miracle. Because on the third day, God rose Jesus again from the dead. And it's that miracle, that's the only miracle you really need to believe in. That God raised Jesus from the dead. That's the miracle that you can put your hope in, your trust in, your belief in, your life in. Put your kids' life in, your grandkids' life in, your work life in. That's the miracle you can put your hope in. See, John wasn't rescued, but his faith wasn't wasted. And his story became part of a greater miracle, the miracle of salvation. And sometimes the greatest answers to your prayer aren't temporary. Sometimes the greatest answers to your prayers will be eternal. Because one day we'll all have new bodies, a new way of living. And that's the greatest hope that we can have, that eternity with God is our home. So when you don't get your miracle, when you feel forgotten, when you feel God is silent, when the miracle doesn't come, just remember, look back, look out, and look up. Because God's still working, God's still present, God's still faithful, and God is still able. Amen?